Hello and welcome to 10 Questions. I'm Jeff Kanige, the editor of NJ Biz, and I'm joined today by Kevin Conner. He's a labor economist and postdoctoral researcher at the University of Utah's Rocky Mountain Center for Occupational and Environmental Health. His work focuses on the construction and trucking industries, examining how labor practices impact job quality, particularly safety. He's contributed to academic research on construction industry issues, including prevailing wage laws, project labor agreements, and occupational safety and health. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. I wanted to start by talking about the apprenticeship investment problem and begin by asking you why New Jersey is facing a worker shortage and which trades are being hit the hardest.
Yeah, so this is a more widespread issue nationally as well. Um, the big issue is that construction is a feast or famine industry, right? And so nobody wants to spend all this time investing in apprentices that they're going to have to lay off during the next downturn. And so that creates a real problem in terms of training, investment, and reproducing the trades. In New Jersey specifically, over 70% of contractors report having trouble filling positions, and an average duration to fill positions of more than 2 months. So it's a pretty substantial drag on business. Um, and these issues tend to fall along trade lines as well. So the most intensive apprenticeship programs that are required for particular trades, electricians are a great example here. Those tend to be hit worse with these kind of challenges, while the lower skilled trades are less so hit by them.
Okay, but why don't individual contractors invest in training?
Yeah, again, it's kind of just passing the buck along, right? So most contractors, particularly non-union contractors, they may have apprentices, but a lot of times that cost of training is falling partially on the apprentice. And again, they're reluctant to invest because if they don't win the next project, they may not be able to keep that apprentice on in the future.
Okay, you mentioned apprentices themselves. Who else is investing in apprentices?
So in New Jersey in particular, it's the joint union management apprenticeship programs. There are 24 apprenticeship programs in the state of New Jersey, and 21 of those are jointly managed union contractor apprenticeship programs. And whenever you dig a little deeper in there as well, in terms of looking at how much kind of capital assets these apprenticeship programs have, the jointly managed programs account for more than 80% of invested capital. And that's really important, especially for trades like operating engineers who need access to expensive, heavy equipment to get trained up.
Okay, and how are those programs funded, though?
So, by and large, they're funded via contributions from signatory contractors. Construction is a weird industry. Unionization works a bit differently, in part because of the volatility of the industry. Unions are able to enter into pre-hire agreements. So, each trade union has its own set of signatory contractors that have agreed to their collective bargaining agreement. And then when those contractors get work, they can draw skilled workers from the union hiring hall, right? And so by being party to that collective bargaining agreement, those signatory contractors make a contribution to the training fund for every hour worked by a union member. And so that's how those programs are able to accumulate the resources to provide kind of high quality training.
Okay, so let's turn to project labor agreements. What is a PLA and what problems does it solve?
Again, unionization is very strange in construction. It feels normal to folks who live in it, but it doesn't to folks who may be involved in unions in other industries. PLAs are kind of a parallel form of collective bargaining that happens in construction. Instead of it being a bargain between a contractor association and a union, PLAs are a bargain between a project owner and a collection of unions. So they differ in the sense that they're multi-trade and they also cover an entire project at a time rather than, and that includes all trades who work on the project, all contractors who work on the project. And so it really is a much more kind of cross-union, vertically integrated form of collective bargaining than traditional collective bargaining in construction.
Okay, and what do owners get out of that?
So there's a lot of things. a lot of what we know about project labor agreements really comes from the public sector. I mean, the joke in research, right, is like if you lose your keys in the dark and there's a street lamp where you look for your keys, you look under the light. And so we look at public sector construction a lot just because that's where the data is, right? Somebody's writing that down in a way that a lot of the private sector PLAs aren't being recorded. And so both public and private um, owners get a lot of assurance that they're going to have access, that their contractors are going to have access to highly skilled labor,
Oh,
right? Because all of the contractors on the PLA, union and non-union, can draw workers from the hiring hall, right? And these workers go through extensive apprenticeship training that rotates them through many more different kinds of work than most of the non-union programs do. So they have a broader set of experience going into the trade. Um, it also helps ensure timely project completion, right? That's partially the access to skilled labor, but it's also conflict resolution. Yeah, excuse me. It's also conflict resolution procedures as well as no strike clauses and things like that. So if, for instance, one trade has beef with their contractors association, there's a work stoppage, that does not apply to any of the PLA work going on. So it gives the public procurement agencies in particular a lot of assurance that work is going to go as planned. Um, a final note there is, again, in the public sector, there's also an idea that we want public dollars to be spent responsibly. And part of that is getting the best project outcome for the cost. But another part is creating other economic outcomes that we might want in the community. So it's really common for a lot of project labor agreements to have community workforce agreements in them, right? And so that ensures that it's helping to create jobs in the community where the project is occurring.
mm, interesting. What does the peer review research say about the completion time and bidders?
Yeah, so the overarching story, because these things get pushed back and forth over time, right? As scholars kind of argue with one another. But the most recent and highest quality research really shows that PLAs are really great for project completion. There was a study in California Public Works in Sacramento County that showed that PLA projects were completed between 15 and 17% faster than their non-PLA counterparts. And, that is a substantial amount of time on any, long running project pipeline, especially these kind of long running large public projects. Um, and, there's two ways that critics argue that PLAs can increase cost. One is via just higher wages, right? And the other one is they're concerned about bidding because you want to make sure you get enough bidders that you get a competitive bid. And most of the research has shown that there isn't a significant impact on the number of bidders whenever a project is a PLA compared to when it's not a PLA.
Okay. Now, where does this 30% cost claim come from? And there was a study issued years ago by the labor commissioner in New Jersey. Where does that come from?
Yeah, so that was just a state investigation of the cost of PLAs, and it focused particularly on school construction, which is common throughout all of the research on PLAs. Again, you look where the light is. And they argued that from their data that they found 30% higher costs on PLAs, just like you said. Now, to their credit, they published all their data, so we were able to really go in and kick the tires on this thing. And the problems with their study really boil down to three factors. One is how they dealt with inflation. Two is timing, and three is apples to oranges, right? So for inflation, they just used kind of a national cost index, and they didn't try to make it particular to the state of New Jersey. Um, as far as timing goes, as we know, construction costs tend to increase over time, right, on a per square footage basis. And all of their non-PLA projects were in the earlier part of the data, and all of the PLAs, for the most part, were in the later part of the data, right? So, given that costs increase all over time, yeah, you would expect PLAs to appear to cost more because they just happen later after construction costs have risen for everyone, right? And the final point is apples to oranges. So a lot of the PLA projects were in, Abbott districts, which are kind of the highest need urban school districts. And so there's a lot of reason to believe why those kinds of projects would be more expensive due to site congestion and other increased construction costs. And so those were kind of the principal problems with that. But because they published their data, we were able to go through and kind of correct those problems. And after we, limit our analysis specifically to elementary schools, which gives us kind of the best apples to apples comparison that we can in that data, the cost difference between PLAs and non-PLAs largely just disappears.
Okay. And were there more specific problems that you can go into?
Yeah, I think that I think I kind of jumped the gun there and got into them a bit as well. But yeah, the big issue is the timing and making sure that you're making valid comparisons between similar kinds of projects. Because what some other more recent research that I was a part of showed is in California in particular, again, California is great with PLA data in a way other states aren't. Um, we found that PLAs tend to get used on the largest, most complex projects, right? And so, all else being equal, if PLAs tend to get used on larger and more complex projects, well, yeah, we would expect them to be more expensive, but that project would have been more expensive even if it wasn't a PLA. And so, we got to make sure that we're comparing, schools to schools and not heavy highway oranges to public housing apples, right?
Okay. So then why does the PLAs cost more narrative persist?
I mean, there's a lot of industry interest in terms of trying to keep um, that narrative going, right? Um, there's a lot of perception, particularly among non-union contractors, that PLA bids will make them non-competitive. And so the thing is like the folks who are bidding on those projects know that you bake those increased labor costs into the bid, or those increased wages. Labor cost is not particularly accurate because another recent study showed that union construction projects tend to be about, I believe it was 10 to 15% more productive, right? So if you're paying higher labor costs, but you're getting more construction output per unit of labor, it could be a wash or could come up even cheaper, although more research is needed on that, right? Um, and so, particularly the non-union segment of the industry wants to keep that narrative of high costs going because then because they feel that PLAs make them non-competitive.
Okay. Kevin Conner, we'll leave it right there. Thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
And thanks for watching. And then we'll see you next time.